They sent an ultimatum. We sent a mirror. Admiral Eva Rostova stood on the command deck of the Theorem, her knuckles white where she gripped the command rail. Before her, the main holographic display showed the Kytheran hegemony's blockade, a rigid, arrogant line of warships, cutting off the fledgling civilian colony on Kepler 186F. Beside the crimson icons of the enemy fleet, a stark white timer counted down 0048-1703. Surrender your system and its resources or face total purification. It was the Kytheran way, a doctrine of absolute compliance enforced across a dozen subjugated worlds. The faint scent of ozone hung in the recycled air, a byproduct of the primary sensor arrays running at maximum power. Solon, the fleet mind, whose consciousness was woven into the very fabric of the flotilla, spoke in a calm, synthesized tone that filled the quiet bridge. Admiral, their comms discipline remains absolute. They are broadcasting the ultimatum on all open channels, but their tactical net is silent. They expect us to break. Rostova's gaze didn't waver from the display. Her fleet, the 5th Expeditionary, was a ghost currently nestled in the system's Oort cloud, running on minimal power. They expect us to follow the old rules, Solon, she said, her voice low and steady. They believe we will either run or charge. She tapped the rail, a slow, rhythmic beat that matched the thrum of the ship's inertial dampeners. They have never faced an accountant before. The Kytherans saw strength in overwhelming force and unyielding demands. Rostova saw only a brittle equation waiting for a new variable. Our patience is a weapon, not a weakness. Tactical Officer Jian Li, her face illuminated by the green glow of her console, swiveled in her seat. Admiral, the first convoy of medical and atmospheric processing supplies, is 5 hours from the blockade's intercept line. They are still running dark, but the Kytherans will spot them soon. Rostova nodded, the movement precise. The convoy was the bait, a carefully prepared piece on a board the enemy didn't even know they were playing on. The civilian ships were automated, their holds filled with life-sustaining supplies, but their corridors empty of life. The Kytherans wouldn't know that. Solon confirmed the mirror lattice arrays are primed and synced, Rostova commanded. A schematic of 20 small, stealthy drones appeared on a secondary screen, their positions forming a wide parabolic curve far out on the system's ecliptic plane. Arrays are green, Admiral, the AI confirmed. Resonance frequencies are stable. We can redirect 97% of any focused energy they throw at us. That was the core of their strategy, not to absorb the blow, but to return it. The Kytherans fought with hammers, seeking to shatter their opponents. Rostova had brought a judo mat. They've made their demand, she murmured, more to herself than her crew. Now we teach them the cost of making it. The stakes were not just the colony below, but the very idea that ultimatums were a valid form of statecraft. We will hold the line with light itself. The comm station chirped a tight beam transmission from the lead convoy drone. Signal from Wayfarer 1, announced Lieutenant Commander Ben Carter, his voice a steady baritone. It's running the pre-recorded loop. A civilian captain pleading for passage citing interstellar accords. The message was pure theater designed to reinforce the Kytheran belief that they were dealing with a predictable, desperate relief effort. The hegemony's doctrine fed on desperation. It was a predator that mistook pleas for weakness, never considering them a tactic. A low vibration ran through the deck plates as the Theorem's primary reactor shifted power. A subtle reminder of the immense energy held in check. Rostova felt the hum in her bones. The Kytherans will jam that transmission within minutes, she predicted. They'll see it as noise. Their doctrine doesn't allow for dialogue. As if on cue, the audio feed from the convoy drone dissolved into a shower of static. The Kytheran hammer was beginning its swing. Their lead destroyer is powering its main weapon. Jian reported, her fingers flying across her console. Energy signature matches a Mark IV particle lance. Overkill for a civilian freighter. Of course it was overkill. That was the point. An execution had to be public. Now the reckoning begins. In a small soundproofed cabin deep within the theorem, a botanist named Alara adjusted the nutrient feed for a row of hydroponic lettuces. She wasn't military, but a civilian specialist attached to the fleet's xenobotany division, tasked with ensuring the colony's food supply would be viable. Her hands, stained with chlorophyll and soil nutrients, were gentle as she pruned a yellowing leaf. She hummed a quiet tune from her homeworld, a melody of resilience and growth. Her work was the reason they were here. It was for the farms, the schools, and the families waiting on that planet, shielded by a fragile atmosphere and the silent resolve of the fleet hiding in the dark. "Solon, are the decoys ready?" Rostova's voice cut through the sterile calm of the bridge. "Ready, Admiral," the AI replied. "They will activate the moment the particle lance discharges. Their energy signature will mimic the convoy ships scattering in panic." This was the first part of the lesson. You could not threaten civilians without a cost. Jian signaled the mirror lattice, slave their targeting sensors to the lance's energy spike. "Aye, Admiral. Lattice is slaved." The pieces were moving. The Kitharans believed they were about to make a statement. They had no idea the statement had already been written for them, and they were merely the delivery system. The universe does not forgive arrogance. The Kytharan destroyer fired. A brilliant, searing beam of coherent particles erupted from its forward emitter, crossing the millions of kilometers toward the lead convoy ship in seconds. It was a spectacle of raw power, a torrent of manufactured lightning meant to terrify and demoralize. But just as the beam reached its target, the decoy drones flared to life, their energy signatures blooming like fireworks. The Kytharan sensors locked onto the original target were momentarily blinded by the sudden burst of false positives. It was a window of less than a second. It was all the time the mirror lattice needed. The 20 stealth drones positioned with geometric perfection activated their resonant fields. The particle lance beam, instead of vaporizing a freighter, struck the invisible parabolic wall of energy. For a microsecond, the beam seemed to splash against nothing, its light bending, warping, twisting back on itself. Then it was gone. "Energy redirected." Solon stated, its voice devoid of triumph. Vector confirmed. "The beam is returning to its origin." On the main display, a new line of light appeared, traveling back along the exact same path. They forged the hammer. We guided the swing. The bridge crew of the Kytharan destroyer. Vigilance would have had approximately 3 seconds to comprehend their error. Their sensors would have screamed warnings reporting their own weapon's energy signature on an inbound trajectory. Their doctrine had no protocol for this. An enemy that did not run, did not fight, but simply returned the blow. It was nonsensical. It was impossible. The returned particle lance, retaining over 90% of its initial charge, struck the Vigilance not on its heavily armored prow, but on its port side, right at the exposed radiator fins of its engine core. There was no grand explosion, just a silent surgical flash of white light. The destroyer's icon on the holographic display flickered from crimson to a dull, angry orange. "Impact confirmed," Jian said, her voice tight. "The Vigilance is crippled. Vented plasma loss of primary power. Life support appears to be failing on multiple decks. One shot fired from their own gun. Open a channel to the Kytharan flagship." Rostova ordered, her tone as cold and precise as the vacuum outside. "General broadcast. No encryption." She stepped forward, her shadow falling across the holographic display of the wounded enemy ship. "We do not strike first, but we will finish it." Ben Carter's hands moved over his console. "Channel is open, Admiral." A new window appeared on the main screen, showing the face of Kytharan Commander Valerius, a man whose features were a mask of stoic fury and disbelief. His ship, the Indomitus, sat at the center of the blockade, a behemoth of gray metal and implied menace. Rostova ignored his image, her message intended for his entire fleet. "This is Admiral Eva Rostova of the Terran Federation Fleet. Your ultimatum is rejected." Her voice filled the bridge, calm and unyielding. "You have just witnessed the consequence of targeting unarmed vessels. We have not fired a single shot yet. One of your ships is disabled. This is your first and only lesson. Withdraw your blockade. Stand down your weapons. The next demonstration will not be a reflection." The countdown timer on the main display continued its inexorable march, 00470214. The ultimatum was still active. But the equation had fundamentally changed. The Catharans had been so certain of their power, they never considered it could be used against them. The silence from Valerius's flagship was deafening. They were recalculating. They were processing an event that their doctrine had told them was impossible. "The ledger is open. The debt will be paid." Rostova watched the enemy commander's face, seeing the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. He was trapped between the humiliation of his flagship's doctrine failing and the unthinkable prospect of admitting it. "Solon, what's their fleet posture?" she asked quietly. "Holding formation," Admiral the AI replied. "The other destroyers are extending their forward shields, but they are not powering weapons. The crippled ship is launching escape pods. They are confused." Confusion was a weapon too. A confused enemy was a predictable one. "They're trying to understand the lattice," Jian surmised, scanning the sector where the beam was redirected. "They're looking for a weapon, a ship, something to target." She let out a short, sharp breath. "They won't find anything. The arrays are already repositioning, running cold again." The mirrors had done their work and vanished back into the dark. "Valerius will not withdraw," Rostova stated. "His pride and his doctrine won't allow it. He'll double down." She turned to Carter. "Ben, I want you to start broadcasting our fleet's public ledger. Everything. Our rules of engagement. Our mandate to protect this colony. Our casualty avoidance protocols. Broadcasted on a repeating loop right alongside his ultimatum. This is a contest of wills, not warships." The crew of the transport ship, Stargazer, watched the broadcast from their cramped mess hall. They were part of a secondary convoy, holding position a full astronomical unit away, waiting for the signal to proceed. On one screen, the stark Kytheran threat played out. On another, the calm, legalistic articles of the Terran fleet's mandate appeared. They saw the promise of protection, the strictures against firing, first was the absolute prohibition of targeting civilians. They were not just cargo to be delivered. They were a principle to be defended. A young engineer, no older than 20, looked at his crew chief. "They're really going to hold them off, aren't they?" The older man nodded slowly, his eyes fixed on the Terran articles of war. "They're not just holding them off," he said. "They're teaching them." On the Theorem's bridge, the tension was a physical presence. The Kytheran fleet remained motionless, a predator contemplating a strange new prey. Admiral Solon's voice cut the silence. "Multiple energy spikes from the Kytheran cruisers. They are deploying drone swarms. Hundreds of tiny red icons bloomed on the tactical display, spreading out in a wide net. They can't find the mirrors, so they're going to saturate the area with sensors," Jian analyzed. "It's a brute force approach. They're giving up on subtlety." Rostova allowed a thin smile. "Good. Let them. Solon, it's time for the second lesson. Brace for the echo. The decoys are repositioning," Carter reported, moving into the projected path of the drone swarm. This time, the decoys were not designed to mimic ships, but something far more ephemeral. They were programmed to simulate the energy signature of a mirror lattice array, activating, but only for a fraction of a second. They were ghosts of light meant to draw the swarm's attention, to make the Kytherans chase shadows. Valerius is angry, Rostova observed, watching the enemy fleet's movements. He's committing his screening forces to hunt for a phantom. He's thinning his blockade line. Every ship sent to investigate a decoy was a ship no longer guarding the colony. The Kytheran formation, once a rigid wall, was becoming porous. It was exactly what she had anticipated. Their doctrine demanded they find and destroy the source of their humiliation. It made them predictable. "Drone swarm is accelerating," Gian announced. "They're converging on the first decoy's projected location." The trap was set. Now they just had to wait for the Kytherans to walk into it. The air on the bridge grew thick with anticipation, the only sound, the gentle hum of the life support systems and the soft clicking of consoles. They cannot hit what is not truly there. The Kytheran drone swarm, a cloud of networked hunters, reached the designated coordinates. Just as they arrived, the first decoy flared, mimicking the energy signature of the mirror lattice. The drones, following their programming, immediately opened fire, unleashing a volley of plasma bolts at the phantom target. The plasma dissipated into empty space. A second later, another decoy flared 100,000 kilometers away. The swarm, reacting with machine speed, changed course to pursue the new ghost. "They're taking the bait," Carter said, a note of satisfaction in his voice. The tactical display was a dizzying dance of red icons chasing flickering blue lights. The Kytherans were firing on ghosts, wasting energy, wasting time, and most importantly, exposing their own positions with every volley. "Solon, begin the real scan," Rostova ordered. "Use their own weapon discharges as our active sensor pings. Map their entire fleet's energy grid. Every ship, every reactor, every shield generator." The Kytheran's aggressive search had become the very tool of its own undoing. They were so busy screaming into the darkness, they didn't realize they were outlining their exact location for a silent listener. Each shot they take is a word in their confession. "We have it," Admiral Solon announced after several minutes of frantic ghost chasing by the enemy. A complete real-time schematic of the Kytheran fleet's power distribution. "We know their shield frequencies, their reactor outputs, their weapon charge cycles. We have the blueprint to their entire nervous system." The information flowed into the Theorem's tactical computers, a treasure trove of data paid for with Kytheran ammunition and arrogance. Rostova looked at the timer. 0:45:51:38. The countdown continued, a monument to her opponent's inflexibility. "They've given us the key," she said softly. "They believe the battle is out there in the dark, but it's about to be right inside their own network." She turned to Gian. "Prepare the override sequence. We're not going to fire a weapon. We're going to turn off their lights." This was the core of her fleet's philosophy, a principle memorialized in its founding charter. Fleet teaches by numbers and remembers by ledgers, never by callers. The Kytherans believed in conquest through bondage. Rostova believed in education through mathematics. "Their system will learn our logic." A young ensign in the engine room monitored the flow of coolant to the Theorem's gravitic drive. The ship was running cold, but not inert. A deep, resonant thrum vibrated through her boots, the sound of immense power held in a state of perfect readiness. She traced a finger over the schematics on her screen, marveling at the elegance of the design. The fleet-mind Solon managed every watt of power with terrifying precision. Nothing was wasted. Every joule had a purpose. It felt less like a machine and more like a living thing, its heartbeat the steady pulse of the reactor core. She and her team were the keepers of that heart, and they would not let it falter. "Override sequence is ready," Admiral Gian confirmed, her voice tense. "We've identified the master control node for their fleet's energy grid. It's on the flagship, the Indomitus. Their own doctrine of centralized command is now their single point of failure." The Kytheran devotion to hierarchy and absolute control meant that a single well-placed intrusion could decapitate their entire operation. Solon packaged the data as a cascading logic bomb, Rostova commanded. The trigger will be the next energy spike from their drone swarm. When they fire on the next ghost, the override will enter their system through the energy regulation software. It was an electronic coup de grace. We will unmake their power from within, use their own protocols against them. Rostova continued, her eyes fixed on the schematic of the Indomitus. The command to shut down their power grid must look like it came from Valerius himself. It must be a valid, authenticated order. Solon's synthesized voice replied, "The authentication keys were embedded in the data streams we intercepted. We can replicate them perfectly. To their network, we will be their commander." The final piece of the trap was in place. The Kytheran fleet was still chasing decoys, their drone swarm firing into the void, completely unaware that their own actions were about to trigger their defeat. The bridge of the theorem was silent, every officer focused on their station, waiting for the inevitable. The air was thick with the scent of recycled oxygen and the faint, clean smell of ozone from the humming electronics. "Next decoy flare in 10 seconds, Carter announced, counting down. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. On the main screen, a blue light blinked into existence. The red cloud of Kytheran drones responded instantly, a volley of plasma fire lancing out toward the Phantom. Their own command will be their undoing. The moment the energy spike was detected, Solon acted. The logic bomb, cloaked as a routine diagnostic packet, slipped into the Kytheran tactical network. It navigated the encrypted channels with effortless grace, using the enemy's own authentication keys as a passport. It reached the master control node on the Indomitus and delivered its payload, a single authenticated command from Commander Valerius to all ships in the fleet. The command was simple, brutal, and to the receiving ship's computers entirely legitimate: execute emergency power down. Code absolute authority. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then across the entire Kytheran fleet, the lights went out. One by one, the crimson icons on the tactical display turned a dead, powerless gray. Engines went cold, shields collapsed, weapon systems discharged harmlessly into space. The formidable blockade, a symbol of Kytheran might, was suddenly a floating graveyard of dark, silent ships. They were not destroyed, but they were defeated. Fleet-wide power failure confirmed across the Kytheran force. Gian reported, her voice a mixture of awe and disbelief. "They're dead in the water, Admiral." The only ship still showing full power was the Indomitus itself. The logic bomb had been programmed to spare the flagship. Valerius had to be able to see what had happened. He had to understand. The darkness we gave them is a canvas for their lesson. Rostova stood straight, her hands clasped behind her back. Solon opened a direct channel to Commander Valerius. Audio only. Put him on the bridge speakers. A soft chime indicated the channel was open. The static of an unencrypted link filled the air, followed by the ragged, furious breathing of the Kytheran commander. "What have you done?" Valerius snarled, his voice stripped of its earlier arrogance. "This is impossible. My ships are not responding." Rostova stepped closer to the comms pickup. "I have done nothing." "Commander," she replied, her voice calm and clear. "Your own fleet's computers received a valid command from your flagship to execute an emergency shutdown. Your doctrine of absolute centralized control was the weapon I used against you." She paused, letting the silence stretch, letting him absorb the full weight of his defeat. "You believed your ultimatum was a show of strength. You were wrong. It was a declaration of your own inflexibility. A system that cannot bend will break. Their doctrine was a cage of their own making." "This is some kind of trick," Valerius stammered, his fury giving way to desperation. "A virus. Electronic warfare. It is not a trick, Rostova corrected him gently. It is mathematics. We studied your systems, we understood your protocols, and we used your own logic to defeat you. We did not destroy your ships, Commander. We simply turned them off. Your crews are alive. Your escape pods are still functional. The countdown timer was still running. 12:05. It was a ghost now, a meaningless relic of a threat that no longer existed. Your ultimatum is void, Rostova stated. Your blockade is broken. The first relief convoy will be passing through your former position in 20 minutes. The automated freighters, the original bait, were now free to complete their mission. The civilian vignette was now a reality. The supplies would reach the colony. The botanist's work would continue. The families on Kepler 186F would have their future secured not by a bloody battle, but by a quiet, irrefutable act of logic. The cost for the Catherans was not measured in lives, but in pride. A far more enduring wound for a culture built on dominance. Now you will learn the meaning of mercy. What do you want? Valerius finally asked, his voice a hoarse whisper. The question hung in the air, the plea of a man who had lost everything but his life. He expected a demand, a surrender, an execution. He was still thinking in terms of ultimatums. I want you to listen, Rostova said. Your fleet is disabled, but we will not harm them. We are broadcasting rescue and repair protocols to your ship's emergency systems. Your engineers will be able to restore primary power within 12 hours. Enough to retreat from this system. She was giving them back their ships, their crews, their lives. She was giving them a choice they had denied to so many others. Why Valerius asked the single word conveying a universe of confusion. His entire worldview, his culture's core belief was shattering. Power was meant to be used. The victor was meant to dominate the vanquished, because our purpose is not to conquer. Rostova explained. It is to teach. You have learned that your doctrine has a cost. You have learned that a threat made against the innocent will be returned to you. That is the only price we demand. The account is settled. On the main display, the first of the automated convoy ships, the Wayfarer 1, sailed past the dark, silent form of the crippled Kytheran destroyer Vigilance. It was a powerful, silent image, a simple cargo hauler, gliding peacefully past a warship it had helped to defeat without ever knowing it. The symbol of life moving past the symbol of a failed ideology. Solon, I want the full recording of this engagement, from their ultimatum to this moment, packaged and sent to the Interstellar Diplomatic Corps, Rostova ordered. The ledger must be public. Every government must see what happened here. They must see that the age of ultimatums is over. The precedent had to be set. This could not be a secret victory. It had to be a public lesson for the entire galaxy. It is already done, Admiral, the fleet mind confirmed. The data packet has been transmitted. Multiple confirmations of receipt are coming in. The news of the Kytheran hegemony's bloodless defeat would spread like wildfire. The story of the fleet that fought with mirrors and logic would become a legend. A new precedent is written in the stars. Rostova finally allowed herself to sit, the tension draining from her shoulders. The bridge was still quiet, the crew moving with a calm, professional efficiency. They had won a major victory without firing a shot. They had upheld their highest ideals, but she knew this was not the end. The Kytheran hegemony was a vast, powerful empire. Valerius was just one commander. They would not take this lesson gracefully. They would adapt. They would return. Jian, what's the status of our fleet? She asked, her voice softer now. All ships are green, Admiral, the tactical officer replied. No damage, no casualties. We are still running cold. The 5th Expeditionary is untouched. It was a perfect victory, a flawless execution of a radical strategy. But the cost was time. They had revealed their hand. The next confrontation would be harder. Rostova looked at the timer. It was still counting down, a foolish, forgotten clock ticking toward a deadline that no longer mattered. "Solon," she said, "turn that thing off." The timer vanished from the screen. "The clock has stopped. The real work begins." The first hint of trouble came not from the Kytheran fleet, but from a point far deeper in the system near the gas giant Kepler 186g. A subtle gravitic distortion, a flicker on the long-range sensors that was too patterned, too deliberate to be a natural phenomenon. It was a whisper in the dark, a secret kept until the perfect moment. Admiral Solon's voice was suddenly sharp, stripped of its usual calm. "I am detecting a secondary energy source, high-yield shielded. It was not present on our initial scans. It was hidden within the planet's magnetic field." The tactical display shifted, zooming in on the massive ringed planet. A new icon appeared, pulsing with a malevolent red light. It was a weapons platform, a very large one. Jian's head snapped up from her console. "That's impossible. The energy signature is massive. It's a system killer, a planetary purification beam." The name sent a chill through the bridge. It was the hegemony's ultimate tool of enforcement, the final word in any ultimatum. A weapon designed not to disable but to annihilate, to scour a planet's surface clean of all life. They did not come here to conquer. They came to erase. The civilian crew in the Stargazer's mess hall had just begun to celebrate. A cheer had gone up when the news of the convoy's safe passage came through. They were laughing, shaking hands, believing the crisis was over. Then a new alert flashed on their public news screen, a fleet-wide emergency broadcast from the Theorem. The message was short and stark: all civilian vessels, evacuate the system. Execute emergency jump protocols, now. This is not a drill. The laughter died in their throats, replaced by a sudden cold dread. The game had changed. Rostova was on her feet instantly. "They baited us," she said, her voice a low growl. "The blockade was a feint. They wanted us to reveal ourselves, to focus on the fleet, while this abomination was preparing to fire. The entire engagement, the clever tactics, the bloodless victory, it had all been a distraction. The Kytherans had not been defeated. They had merely sacrificed a knight to trap the queen. The weapon is charging." Jian reported, her voice strained. "Estimated time to full power 90 minutes. Its target is Kepler 186f, the colony, the farms, the people. They were still the target. The ultimatum had never truly been about resources. It was about extermination. Their ultimatum was a lie. The execution was the truth. "Solon, can the mirror lattice handle a beam of that magnitude?" Rostova demanded. The AI's reply was grim. "Negative, Admiral. The purification beam operates on a chaotic energy frequency. It cannot be reflected. It can only be endured. The lattice arrays would be vaporized instantly. Our ship's shields would last less than a second." They had brought a judo mat to a gunfight, and their opponent had just revealed they were holding a bomb. The conflict triangle had shifted. Rostova's morality. Solon's calculus, the Kytheran doctrine. The doctrine was now revealed to be even more brutal than she had imagined. There was no negotiation, no surrender, only compliance or death. Her choice was now stark. She could run, save her fleet, and leave the colony to die. Or she could stay and fight an impossible battle against a weapon that could erase worlds. "Get me Valerius," she snapped. The channel opened again, this time with video. The Kytheran commander's face appeared no longer defeated, but filled with a cold, triumphant certainty. "You are clever, Admiral," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "But you are also naive. Did you really believe we would risk our fleet for a single system?" They were expendable, a necessary cost to draw you out. Our mercy has been mistaken for weakness. The ultimatum was for the colony Rostova. Not for you, Valerius continued, a cruel smile playing on his lips. They had 48 hours to surrender their world. They chose to trust you instead. A fatal error. Now you get to watch them pay for their faith. He was gloating, savoring his victory. He believed he had already won. Rostova's mind raced, processing the new reality. Her fleet was designed for strategic engagement, for surgical strikes, for battles of logic. It was not designed for a brute force confrontation with a doomsday weapon. But her ethos, the very core of her command, was clear: teach first, fight if forced. The lesson had failed. Now she was forced to fight. Solon, she said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, her eyes never leaving Valerius's face on the screen. Calculate the absolute weakest point of that weapon's emitter array. I don't care about the shields, the armor, the power source. I want the single point of structural failure. That data is not available. The AI responded. The weapon is a black box. Then make it available. Rostova ordered. Launch every sensor drone we have. I want a full spectrum analysis. We are going to tear its secrets apart one wavelength at a time. The time for lessons is over. The bridge of the theorem transformed. What had been a center for quiet strategic observation became a frantic hub of activity. The low hum of the ship intensified as the reactor spooled up to full combat readiness. Coolant hissed in the walls as energy was diverted to sensor arrays and weapon systems. The deck plates vibrated with a new aggressive energy. The fleet was waking up. Drones are away, Carter announced. Full spectrum scan in progress. Rostova turned away from Valerius's smug face, cutting the channel without another word. He was irrelevant now. He was just the architect of a problem that she had to solve. The real enemy was the weapon and the 90-minute countdown to its activation. Jayan, I want our entire fleet to reposition. Form a protective screen between that weapon and the colony. I don't care if our shields won't last. We will be the barrier. It was a desperate move, a suicidal one. But it would buy time. And time was the only resource she had left. Admiral Solon interjected. That course of action will result in the total loss of the fleet, with a 99.8% certainty. I am aware of the odds, Solon, Rostova said, her voice like ice. But the colony's chance of survival is currently 0. We will change that equation. We will become the shield. As the ships of the 5th Expeditionary moved into position, a new broadcast began, this one from the colony on Kepler 186F. It was not from the government, but from the people. A shaky camera showed the face of a young woman, a teacher, her classroom of children huddled behind her. Their faces were terrified, but resolute. To the fleet. We see you, the woman said, her voice breaking, but firm. We see you moving to protect us. We know what you are risking. We will not let your sacrifice be in vain. We are evacuating to the deep shelters. We will survive this. Thank you. The broadcast cut out, but the message had been delivered. The stakes were no longer abstract. They were the faces of children. Rostova felt a knot tighten in her chest. Her arc, once a steady path of restraint, was being forged into one of righteous, terrifying decisiveness. There was no more room for cleverness, for mirrors, for ledgers. There was only the hard, unyielding calculus of sacrifice. Hold the line until the line breaks. The drones are getting readings. Admiral Gian reported, her eyes wide. The emitter is shielded by a quantum resonance field. It's designed to destabilize any matter or energy that passes through it. That's why the beam can't be reflected. It was a perfect defense, an unbreachable wall. But every wall has a door. But there's an anomaly. Jian continued, her fingers flying. The shield has to cycle. There's a harmonic frequency, a pulse just before it projects the main beam. For a fraction of a millisecond, the field wavers. It was a tiny flaw, a microscopic crack in the armor, but it was enough. Solon, can we time a torpedo volley to hit that exact millisecond? Rostova asked. The probability of a successful hit is infinitesimal, Admiral, the AI stated. The timing window is too short. The weapon's own energy discharge would destroy the torpedoes before they reached the target. Then we won't use torpedoes, Rostova declared. We'll use a ship. There is always a cost. The bridge fell silent. Every officer understood the implication. To strike that target at that precise moment, a ship would have to be practically on top of the emitter when it fired. It would be a suicide run, a one-way trip into the heart of the storm. The cost of victory had just been defined, and it was the life of a ship and its crew. I will take the theorem, Rostova said, her voice leaving no room for argument. Jian, you have the con of the fleet. Your orders are to hold the line until the last possible second, then get our people out of here. Commander Ben Carter stepped forward. Admiral, no. Let me take the Dauntless. My crew. We volunteer. The flagship must survive. Rostova looked at him, seeing the fierce loyalty in his eyes. She saw the same resolve in every member of her bridge crew. They were all willing to pay the price. The theorem has the fastest impulse engines and the most precise maneuvering thrusters. She said, her tone softening slightly. And it has Solon. We have the highest probability of success. It was a cold, logical assessment, but it was also a lie. She would not order a crew to their deaths. If a sacrifice was required, it would be hers. We pay our own debts. Solon's voice filled the bridge, a surprising note of something other than logic in its synthesized tone. Admiral, there is another way. A third option. Every head turned to the main holographic display, where the AI was projecting a complex series of energy diagrams. The mirror lattice arrays, Solon explained. They cannot reflect the beam, but they can be reconfigured. We can overload their resonant fields, turning all 20 arrays into focused directional bombs. The AI highlighted the trajectory. The arrays positioned far out in the system could be propelled toward the weapon platform at incredible speed. They are small, stealthy, Solon continued. The Kytheran weapons' point defenses are designed to target ships, not drone-sized objects moving at a fraction of light speed. We can detonate them simultaneously against the emitter shield. The resulting cascade of energy might be enough to create a sustained breach in the shield, lasting a full second or more. A 1-second window. It was an eternity compared to a millisecond. That would give the rest of the fleet a clear shot. Jian finished, her mind already calculating firing solutions. We could hit it with everything we have. Rostova looked at the plan, her strategic mind seeing the brutal elegance of it. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble, but it was a chance. Do it, Solon, she said. Turn our mirrors into spears. The mirrors will become swords. The final 10 minutes before the weapon fired were the longest of Rostova's life. The reconfigured mirror arrays, now dubbed Lancer drones, accelerated toward their target, silent messengers of destruction. The 5th Expeditionary held its position, a thin, defiant line of ships, their weapons charged and ready, their crews braced for the inevitable. The air on the Theorem's bridge was electric, a palpable mix of fear and resolve. The deck hummed with the raw power of the ship's combat systems. The scent of ozone was sharp, a promise of the storm to come. Lancers are 30 seconds from impact. Carter announced, his voice a low, steady drumbeat. All ships slave your main weapons to my mark. Rostova gripped the command rail, her eyes locked on the Kytheran weapon platform. It was a monument to tyranny, a symbol of a doctrine that valued power over life. And she was about to tear it down. Kytherin weapon is at 99% charge, Jian warned. Emitter shield is at maximum resonance. The moment of truth was upon them. The entire campaign, the lives of the colonists, the future of her fleet. It all came down to this single desperate second. Let the ledger show we stood. The 20 Lancer drones struck the emitter shield simultaneously. There was no sound, only a blinding flash of pure energy that overwhelmed the sensors. A wave of raw power washed over the human fleet, causing shields to flare and systems to flicker. On the main display, the quantum resonance field around the Kytherin weapon wavered, tearing open like a curtain of light. The 1-second window was open. Fire! Rostova roared, her voice echoing across the bridge. The 5th Expeditionary unleashed hell. Every ship from the mighty Therum down to the smallest frigate fired every weapon it had. Torpedoes, particle beams, mass driver rounds, a coordinated storm of righteous fury converged on the single exposed point of the enemy's weapon. The torrent of ordnance crossed the distance and struck the emitter array in a single cataclysmic instant. The Kytherin weapon, the planet killer, the final word in their doctrine of fear, erupted. A silent, expanding sphere of white-hot plasma consumed the station, its death throes a spectacular, terrible starburst in the void. Their final word has been erased. For a long moment, the only thing visible on the main screen was the fading glare of the explosion. The bridge was silent, the crew holding their breath. Then Jian spoke, her voice choked with emotion. Target! Target is destroyed. The weapon is gone. A wave of relief washed over the bridge so powerful, it was almost a physical force. Cheers erupted, a spontaneous, joyous sound that filled the space. Officers were hugging, laughing, crying. They had done it. They had faced the abyss and won. Rostova did not cheer. She stood watching the dissipating cloud of gas and debris, her heart heavy with the cost. The mirror lattice, the beautiful, elegant tool of deflection and teaching, was gone. Sacrificed. They had been forced to become what they despised, if only for a moment. They had answered destruction with destruction. Admiral Ben Carter said, his voice thick with relief. The colony is safe. We did it. Rostova nodded, a slow, tired movement. Yes, we did. But she knew this victory was different. The first one had been a lesson. This one was a scar. It was a reminder that sometimes the only way to stop a hammer is to become one yourself. We have become the fire that cleanses the shadow. The aftermath of the explosion was a deafening silence. The Kytherin weapon platform, a moment ago a harbinger of planetary death, was now a rapidly expanding cloud of superheated gas and shattered metal. On the bridge of the Therum, the cheers of the crew subsided into a stunned, breathless calm. They had stared into the face of their own annihilation and had not blinked. The cost had been their entire array of mirror drones, the centerpiece of their non-lethal strategy, but the colony and the fleet survived. The scent of victory was sharp and metallic, like ozone and hot adrenaline. Damage reports, Rostova said, her voice cutting through the quiet awe. Her knuckles were still white on the command rail. All stations report. One by one, her officers responded. Shields holding at 12%, but regenerating Jian Li announced, her tone crisp and professional again. Minor plasma scoring on the forward hull of the Dauntless and the Resolution. No casualties. Ben Carter added, the convoy is changing course, moving back to the designated safe zone. The colony is hailing us on all channels. They're grateful. Rostova nodded. Gratitude was good, but safety was better. The battle is won, but the war is not over. Her eyes were on the main tactical display at the string of gray icons that represented the disabled Kytherin blockade fleet. Solon, what is the status of Valerius's ships? She asked. Their power grids are still offline. Admiral, the AI responded. However, I am detecting manual engineering overrides. Their crews are attempting to restart their reactors. I estimate they will have minimal power in 2 hours and combat capability in 4. They were wounded, but not dead. A cornered animal was still dangerous. A chime from the communications console drew their attention. Admiral Carter said, his brow furrowed. It's Valerius. He's broadcasting on an open channel, audio only. He sounds calm. That single word sent a fresh wave of unease through the bridge. A defeated commander should be furious or broken. Calm was wrong. Put him on Rostova, commanded her voice low. Valerius's voice filled the air, smooth and laced with a chilling, detached amusement. A spectacular display, Admiral. You have destroyed our purification platform. You must feel quite proud. The condescension was back, but it was different now. It wasn't the arrogance of a predator, but the quiet confidence of a poisoner who knows the dose is already administered. You have won the battle of the sky, Rostova. But you have already lost the war on the ground. Their silence was a mask for a deeper treachery. What are you talking about? Valerius Rostova demanded, her eyes narrowing. The weapon is gone. The weapon, as you call it, was merely the final symptom, Valerius explained, his voice like silk and venom. The disease was delivered 3 days ago. A lovely little swarm of nanites seeded into the upper atmosphere by probes disguised as micrometeoroids. They are programmed with a very simple, very Kytheran directive: deconstruct any biological matter that does not match the native biome. Your colonists, your crops, your very bacteria are being unwritten cell by cell. A cold dread far deeper than the fear of the planet killer settled over the bridge. The deck plates, still vibrating with the energy of their recent victory, suddenly felt like the floor of a tomb. The countdown was never for the weapon, Admiral Valerius purred. It was for the nanites to reach irreversible saturation. That deadline passed 20 minutes ago. Congratulations on your victory. Your prize is a graveyard. The channel went dead. The real weapon was never the gun. It was the seed. Rostova's command was instantaneous, her voice a whip crack in the stunned silence. Solon full-spectrum bioscan of the planet's surface. Now get me the colonial governor. The faces of her crew were pale. The joy of their survival curdled into horror. They had fought a warship only to discover the real enemy was a plague. Jian's hands flew across her console, her face a mask of grim focus. Carter was already hailing the colony, his jaw tight. The governor's face appeared on screen, etched with confusion. Admiral, we saw the explosion. We thought, is it over, Governor? I need you to listen to me very carefully, Rostova said, her tone leaving no room for panic. The Kytherans claim to have released a biological agent, a nanite swarm. We need immediate real-time reports from your environmental and medical sensors. The governor's face paled. We've had some strange readings. Anomalous protein breakdown in some soil samples. We thought it was sensor malfunction. It wasn't a malfunction. It was the beginning of the end. The display shifted to show the initial results of Solon's scan. Faint, almost undetectable at first, but growing in clarity. A crimson blush was spreading through the planet's biosphere, a microscopic tide of destruction. A reckoning was happening at a scale we could not see. In a brightly lit hydroponics bay on Kepler 186f, the botanist Ilara stared at her microscope, her heart pounding. The lettuce leaf under the lens, which should have been a vibrant lattice of green cells, was dissolving. The cell walls were crumbling, the chloroplasts fading to a dull, lifeless gray. She saw them then, tiny, impossibly fast metallic specks moving between the cells like sharks in a reef. They weren't eating the cells. They were rewriting them, turning them into a gray sludge that was hostile to the very concept of life. She backed away from the microscope, a hand flying to her mouth. The food she had so carefully nurtured to feed the colony was becoming poison. The very ground beneath their feet was turning on them. On the bridge of the theorem, the full picture was becoming terrifyingly clear. The nanites are self-replicating. Solon reported, its voice a flat, emotionless stream of data that was more frightening than any alarm. They are using the planet's own biomass as fuel. At the current rate of replication, all Terran life on the planet will be rendered non-viable in 72 hours. The Kytheran ultimatum had not been a lie. It had just been delivered by a quieter, more patient executioner. "We have to do something," Ben Carter said, his voice raw. "We could use our point defense lasers. Scour the affected zones from orbit." Jianli shook her head, her expression grim. "The swarm is everywhere, Ben. In the air, the water, the soil. To burn it out, we'd have to burn the whole planet. We'd be finishing their job for them." The cure could not be worse than the disease. The terrible irony settled upon them. Their entire military doctrine was useless here. They could not shoot a plague. They could not intimidate a microscopic machine. Rostova's mind, a finely honed weapon of strategy and tactics, was faced with a problem it could not flank, could not outwit, could not reflect. The conflict triangle had collapsed. Her morality demanded she save the colony. The Kytheran doctrine demanded its utter annihilation. And Solon's calculus was offering no third option. "Admiral," the AI said, its synthesized voice cutting through the despair, "there may be a theoretical path. The nanites are networked. They operate as a single entity guided by a core programming logic. It may be possible to create a cascading shutdown command, an electronic virus to disable them." Rostova seized on the sliver of hope. "How?" "I would need to interface directly with their network," Solon explained. "The command hub for the swarm was the purification platform. Its destruction has severed their primary link, but the debris field will contain fragments of the control hardware. If I can analyze those fragments, I might be able to reverse engineer their command language." It was a long shot, a desperate attempt to find a key in the wreckage of a blasted open door. "Do it!" Rostova ordered. "Ben, get our collection drones into that debris field. I want every circuit board, every data chip, every fragment bigger than your fist. Gian, keep your eyes on the Kytheran fleet. The moment they have engines, they're going to run. I want to know the second they twitch. We will find the answer in the ashes of their arrogance." The next few hours were a blur of controlled, frantic activity. The small, nimble drones of the 5th Expeditionary swarmed into the cloud of radioactive debris, their manipulator arms carefully retrieving pieces of the dead weapon. On the bridge, a tense silence reigned, broken only by the quiet reports of the crew and the soft hum of the life support. The ship itself seemed to be holding its breath. Every eye was on the main screen where Solon was assembling a virtual blueprint of the nanite control system from the scavenged fragments. "The architecture is elegant," Solon stated, a strange observation from a machine. "It is based on their core doctrine. Each nanite is an autonomous agent, but it is slaved to a central command. The command is a simple binary query: is the target cell native or other? If other, the nanite injects a catalyst that forces cellular deconstruction. It was the ultimatum doctrine miniaturized and weaponized, a demand for compliance at a biological level. Rostova stared at the diagram at the flow of ruthless binary logic. Native or other. Comply or die. There was no room for nuance, no third way. And in that inflexibility, she finally saw a weakness. It was the same weakness Valerius had shown. The same weakness their entire hegemony was built on. A system that cannot bend will break. Their greatest strength is their most fatal flaw. They see the world in black and white, Solon. Rostova said, a new energy in her voice. They don't have a word for gray. That's our weapon. She turned to her tactical officer. Jian, what was the primary component of the planet's pre-colonial biosphere? The absolute most common native life form. Jian, momentarily confused by the question, tapped at her console. That would be a specific type of Archaea admiral. A silicon-based microbe that dominates the soil composition. It's metabolically inert to us. Perfect, Rostova said. Solon, forget a shutdown command. That's a hammer and we are not a hammer. I want you to write a new query. A new question to feed into their network. Her eyes gleamed with a dangerous, brilliant light. We are not going to destroy them. We are going to re-educate them. The plan was audacious, bordering on insane. They would not try to kill the nanites. They would not try to turn them off. They would give them a logic puzzle they could not solve. They would introduce a third variable into their binary world. We will answer their ultimatum with a paradox. Deep in the medical bay, a team of doctors and xenobiologists worked in a sealed environment. They had a sample of the nanite-infected soil, and they watched in horror as it devoured every Terran microbe they introduced. The lead scientist, a woman named Dr. Aris, listened to the Admiral's plan, piped through her earpiece. She looked from the dying cultures on her screen to the schematics being sent from the bridge. It's theoretically possible, she murmured to her assistant. But the synthesis. We'd have to create a brand new compound. A protein that acts as a carrier for the native Archaea's chemical signature. They were being asked to build a bridge between two forms of life, one that nature had never intended, Admiral Solon said. I have isolated their communication frequency. I can broadcast to the entire swarm simultaneously. But to introduce a new query, I need to authenticate it. I need to convince the swarm that the command is coming from their own central control. Rostova nodded. Use the same principle as before. Use Valerius's own authority against him. Find his digital fingerprint in the wreckage and sign our message with it. The pieces were coming together. A message of confusion signed with the voice of their god, delivered into the heart of the hive mind. It was the mirror lattice reborn not as a shield of light, but as a scalpel of pure logic. Their own voice will become the agent of their confusion. Kitharan fleet is powering up. Admiral Jian's warning cut through the tense atmosphere. I'm reading reactor signatures on 3 of their destroyers. They're getting ready to bolt. Let them, Rostova said, her focus absolute. They are yesterday's problem. Solon, is the new query ready? It is the AI confirmed. I have packaged it as a priority update to the nanites' targeting parameters. The core logic is simple. It introduces a third classification, symbiotic. It defines this new state as any Terran cell that is in direct proximity to a native Archaea microbe. On the main screen, a simulation played out. A nanite approaches a human cell. Its query, once native or other, is now native, other, or symbiotic. The simple, brutal logic that had guided it was now broken, complicated. The response to this new state, Solon continued, is also taken from their doctrine. Preservation of the system is the highest priority. When faced with a logical conflict, their programming defaults to a non-destructive state. It will not deconstruct the symbiotic cell. It will thus observe it and protect it as part of the new, more complex system it has been ordered to recognize. They will become shepherds of the lives they sought to end. Dr. Aris Rostova said, her voice calm and steady over the comms. How long to synthesize the carrier compound? We're working as fast as we can. Admiral, the scientist replied, her voice strained. We can have a viable batch ready for dispersal in 30 minutes. We can use the colony's atmospheric processors to spread it. It will be like seeding clouds to make it rain. Rain down a chemical salvation. 30 minutes. On the tactical display, the Kytheran ships were beginning to move slowly, clumsily, like wounded animals dragging themselves from a trap. They were not a threat. They were a reminder. a monument to a failed ideology running from a battle they had already lost twice. Rostova ignored them. Her eyes were on the clock and on the crimson tide that was still spreading across the planet below. The wait was agonizing. Every person on the bridge could feel the seconds ticking by, each one representing millions of microscopic deaths on the world below. A junior ensign at the sensor station felt a faint vibration under his feet as the ship's primary transmitter began to charge the power for Solon's broadcast, being drawn from the heart of the theorem. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of ozone and anticipation. The deepest cuts are healed with the smallest blades. "The compound is ready," Dr. Eris announced, her voice filled with a mixture of exhaustion and triumph. "The atmospheric processors are engaged. Dispersal has begun." On the surface, invisible to the naked eye, a fine, engineered mist began to settle over the forests and plains, carrying the chemical key, the message of symbiosis. Solon Rostova said, her voice barely a whisper. "Send the message." The ship shuddered almost imperceptibly as a massive burst of focused data was fired from its main transmitter. It was not a weapon. It was an idea. A single targeted thought aimed at 1,000,000,000,000 mindless machines. For a moment, nothing changed. The crimson tide on the bioscan remained a planetary wound that seemed impossible to heal. Then, at the edges, it began to shift. The angry red began to recede, replaced not by the healthy green of Terran life, but by a new color. A soft, vibrant gold, the color of symbiosis. The nanites, their absolute logic shattered by the new command, were defaulting to their prime directive. They were protecting the system, the new combined system of Terran and native life. The tide of death had not just stopped, it had reversed. The nanites were now repairing the very cells they had been deconstructing moments before. Their poison has become their panacea. Commander Valerius, on the bridge of his limping flagship, watched the same bioscan on his own displays. He saw the red vanish, replaced by the impossible gold. He did not understand the science, the logic, the sheer intellectual audacity of what had just happened. He only understood one thing he had lost. His weapon of ultimate purification had been turned into an agent of ultimate integration. The humans had not just survived. They had merged with the planet, becoming more native than the natives. His ultimatum doctrine, the core of his culture, the foundation of his power, had been rendered not just obsolete, but absurd. He had threatened to erase them, and in doing so, he had anchored them to this world forever. He gave a single quiet order to his helm officer. "Take us home." The disgraced Kithaeron fleet, what was left of it, turned its back on the golden world and limped away into the darkness. Their defeat was not in the battle, but in the understanding. Rostova watched them go. There was no triumph in her, only a profound, bone-deep weariness. She had been forced to make a terrible choice at the weapon platform, and a brilliant one here. One was a scar, the other a cure. She had held the line. She had protected her people. She had honored her ethos. The cost was a forever altered colony, a new form of life created in the crucible of conflict. A small price to pay for survival. "Solon," she said softly. "Update the public ledger." The institutional consequence for the Kytheran hegemony's use of indiscriminate nanological weapons is a full interstellar quarantine. Their doctrine is now officially classified as a biohazard. A new precedent had been set. The Rostova doctrine. You do not answer a binary threat by choosing a side. You answer it by creating a third path that makes the initial choice irrelevant. On her main console, a final bioscan from Kepler 186f resolved into a clear, high-definition image. The fields and forests, once threatened with microscopic dissolution, were now shimmering with a faint golden light, a visible sign of the nanite swarm now reprogrammed, integrated, and protective. Ultimatums are the tools of the fearful. They are the final, desperate shout of an argument that has already been lost. True strength isn't in the power to destroy, but in the wisdom to create a solution where none existed before. They came to this system to prove their might, to write another chapter in their long, bloody history of conquest. Instead, they taught us how to turn a world into a garden using their own poison as the seed. Sometimes the only way to win is to rewrite the rules of the game.